practicing that a lot more. And I've been trying to, come every Thursday, but I have like meetings for my other job at the same time as this sometimes. So today I got in, so I'm happy about that.
Awesome. Welcome. And you chose a great night to be here because Simon is an amazing speaker and a wonderful author. So, and actually he's here tonight. So big welcome to you, Simon Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Welcome to Thoughtful Thursdays. Nice to have you with us.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real honor to be here and to meet so many wonderful people.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to quickly say that before we get going, just real quick, I was just going to mention to everyone that if you have questions or comments for Simon, please post them in the chat box. We will examine them at the end of our discussion. So feel free to or write them down and you can say them out verbally. But yeah, without further ado, please take it away. It's the screen. Should I make you the host? Do you have a presentation to share, or you'll just be speaking? Or should I make you the host so you can share your screen?
I'll just be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we'll move into the free flow of conversation.
Awesome.
I look forward to getting to know all of you a little bit in the conversations that we'll have in a short time on the topic of the Bhagavad Gita.
Simon Prabhu, just one slight thing about your audio. It's coming through a little bit muffled. Is there anything covering your laptop, or is the microphone slightly covered, or?
There isn't. No, nothing's covering it at the moment.
Okay. All right. That's fine. That's fine then. We can hear you. I just thought something was covering because it's just sounding slightly soft and muffled. But that's okay. We can hear you. We can understand you. Yeah.
What I'll do, Harisham Prabhu, is I'll try and speak up a little bit. Maybe that'll help.
That'll help. Okay. Great. Welcome.
I'm actually in Costa Rica at the moment, so I'm kind of praying that there's no electrical failure, electricity stops or anything. Hopefully it'll be fine. So today we'll explore the Bhagavad Gita, the wisdom teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. And this is something of an introduction to a sacred text that is so important for the yoga tradition. And I have a personal motivation in sharing this. Well, two motivations. One of them is that the teachings of the Gita have been so important and impactful in my own life, helping me through some very difficult situations. So I'm always very keen to share these teachings because I have some sense of their power. The second reason is that in sharing these teachings, I increase my own awareness and my own understanding and practice of those teachings. So in that sense, I see all of you as my teacher, and it's a real honor to meet you and spend some time with you today. So just to introduce the Bhagavad Gita, for those of you who might not be so familiar with this text, the Bhagavad Gita is an ancient classic on yoga, and it forms part of a much larger epic known as the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata it's the longest poem that's ever been written, about 1.8 million words. And within that great adventure story of the Mahabharata, there are 18 chapters that make up the centerpiece of that work. And these are the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita takes all of the most significant, the most important wisdom teachings in the whole of the ancient Indian tradition and puts them together in 18 chapters. So if you know a little about the Bhagavad Gita, you have an understanding of the essence of all of the Vedas, all of the Upanishads. So there are a few different yoga texts that are considered significant, like some of you will have heard of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You may have heard of the Hatha Pradipika, the Gheranda Samhita, but there's something about the Bhagavad Gita that places it in a unique category. Well, several things. One of them is that Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and other texts on yoga are actually meant for those who give up the world. So ascetics, people who give up society, they live in a cave or in a forest or on a mountain. That's not to say that they don't contain really important teachings and helpful teachings, but the texts were written for mendicants, ascetics. The Bhagavad Gita, however, was composed for those who are in active engagement in the world, those who want to make a difference in society, who are living everyday lives like you and me. Another peculiar thing about the Gita is that these teachings, which are spoken by Krishna to the warrior Arjuna, are spoken in the middle of a battlefield. What a strange setting at the beginning of war. So most other wisdom teachings from India, the setting is really quite different. They might be spoken in a forest, on a beautiful mountain, or next to a peaceful river. But the Gita's teachings are spoken in the middle of a battlefield between two armies. So what happens, we don't have time to go through some of the adventure of the Mahabharata, but there's a really interesting adventure story that leads up to this point where there's a battle, a huge battle that takes place at Kurukshetra, which is in North India. And Arjuna, the warrior, he's about to, the two armies are about to come together. And he asks his best friend and charioteer, Krishna, please take my chariot between these two armies so I can see who has come here to fight. So Krishna, smiling, takes the chariot. We will discover later who Krishna is, the identity of Krishna. So Krishna, the charioteer of Arjuna, takes the chariot between these two armies, vast armies. You cannot see the end of these armies whichever way you look. And there, Arjuna, who does he see? He sees his grandfather, he sees his uncles, his brothers, his cousins, his best friends, his gurus, his teachers. And he thinks, I cannot participate in this battle. Something happens in that moment. And Arjuna falls into a crisis, what we might call a dark night of the soul. That crisis is so serious that it has physical symptoms, which Arjuna explains. He says, my friend Krishna, the bow, my instrument of action, my bow is slipping from my hand. The hairs on my body are standing on end. I feel like I'm trembling and I cannot, my mouth feels dry and my skin feels like it's burning. I cannot fight this battle. And he casts aside his bow and arrow and sits down in his chariot with tears in his eyes. And then Krishna begins to speak the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. So there are different levels of meaning of the Bhagavad Gita, different dimensions to the Gita that operate simultaneously. There's a literal meaning. There is an ethical meaning, an ethical dimension. Our great teachers, our acharyas, have also explained that the Gita simultaneously has a symbolic meaning. So Kurukshetra is the field of action, the battlefield.
Simon, could you repeat that once? Because you're kind of choppy. Can you repeat the last from Kurukshetra? Can you repeat that statement one more time? It got really choppy, so we couldn't hear you.
So Kurukshetra is the name of the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And Kuru comes from Kri, which means to do. Kshetra means field. So it's the field of doing. It's the field of action. So in that sense, all of us are at Kurukshetra. We are all on the field of action. We cannot escape action at any point. In fact, Arjuna thinks, I just want to leave. I want to leave this field of action. Krishna tells Arjuna, you can never escape action. Even when we decide not to do anything. Some of you may know this. when we decide not to do anything. That may be the most significant action with the greatest impact. So in this world, to avoid action is not possible. So the only choice we really have is how can we act skillfully? How can we act in the best way? And this Krishna defines as yoga. Krishna says, yoga karmasu kaushalam. Yoga is skillfulness in performing action. So usually when we think of yoga, we think of asanas, postures, or pranayama, breathing exercises. But of course, that's just a very small part of yoga. Yoga is the art of awakening our full potential. It's the art of being skillful in everything that we do. So the Bhagavad Gita is a compendium of teachings, of wisdom that can help us live in the most effective way in this world. Krishna gives 18 systems of yoga. So there are 18 chapters, and each one is a different system of yoga. These systems of yoga are so powerful. We will look today briefly at the very first system of yoga, which is called Vishad Yoga, the yoga of crisis, or the yoga of despair. So, but before doing that, we'll just have a look at, I want to give you just a sense of the Gita, of some of the other systems of yoga, so you can get a flavor for this sacred text. No doubt Harishyam Prabhu, in due course in the group, will be able to take you at various points through some of these systems of yoga. They're just incredible. One system is called Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is a system of yoga which is practiced through the work that we do every day. So I don't know if it's the same in Chicago, but I know that in London, in New York as well, in most places I've been, actually every place I've been, the majority of people hate their work. Most people, like maybe 90% or 95%, their favorite day of the week is Friday. And their worst day of the week is Monday when they have to go to work. So, but if we think about it,
and
most of the time,
the more they hate their work, the more money they make. That's the way to get you.
The more they hate their work, the more they're deemed successful in society. Sometimes.
Sometimes. Yes.
So, if we think about it, if most of our life is actually spent in doing some form of work. So most of us, we start work at maybe the age of around 20. I don't know what the retirement age is in the US. In England, it's 65. So most of our life is spent doing something related to work. If we set up our life in such a way that we're deeply unhappy at work, we are setting up our life, we're setting ourselves up to be deeply unhappy in the majority of our life. What a tragedy. So the Gita teaches how to approach our work in a way that it becomes deeply fulfilling, and how our work becomes, Krishna even says, through this system of yoga, you can make your work your yoga practice. Your work becomes your worship. So there are 3 steps to karma yoga, and they're actually quite easy steps, but they lead to a profound change in the way that we engage with life. So another system of yoga is called the yoga of distinguishing between the 3 gunas. Gunas are qualities that form the fabric of this world. You may have heard of sattva, rajas, and tamas. These are 3 qualities that combine together to affect our minds and to create everything in this world. So this system of yoga allows us to differentiate between these 3 qualities, these 3 forces, and to be able to use them in the best way. So we can then understand, we can actually see the forces of these 3 gunas in communication, in the way we begin a project, in the way we finish a project, in our relationships. And it brings a type of awareness that is just so important for being effective in the world. Krishna also then teaches how to transcend beyond the three gunas. Another system of yoga is called the yoga of the wealth of the gods and demons. This is a system, I sometimes call this treasure hunt yoga, because it's about gathering the treasure of the gods and goddesses. So these are qualities like humility, patience, gratitude, compassion, and kindness. Gathering these so the first step is to locate where those qualities are to be found, and then to keep them within our being, within our heart, in such a way that they become who we are, and no matter what happens in this world, they never leave us. That's called the yoga of the divine, of the wealth of the gods and goddesses. So you see here, these are just a few of the 18 systems of yoga. Today we'll look at, very quickly, very briefly, as an introduction, we'll look at the yoga of crisis, the yoga of despair. So it's quite striking, actually, that there can be something such as the yoga of despair, because we generally, especially in the West, we think of yoga as being about peace, about tranquility and happiness. How can there be something like the yoga of despair? One thing about yoga in the West is that there is often not a space for crisis and difficulty in our society in general. Actually, in the West, no one really speaks about crisis. It's certainly in England is quite a taboo subject. If you're going through a personal crisis, you might tell your best friends, you won't tell anyone else. You won't tell your work colleagues. You may not even tell all of your friends. And crisis has like a stigma attached to it. You know, no one wants to be labeled as the person who has had a nervous breakdown or who's had some kind of difficulty. But the reality of life is that we each go through a dark night of the soul, a period of crisis at least once in our life. Some of us may go through crisis several times. And there's very little, if anything, in our education and upbringing to prepare us for that. In ancient India and other societies and cultures, crisis was not looked at in that way. Rather, crisis was seen as something, as a rite of passage, a sacred rite of passage, something that we inevitably go through as part of our journey through life and our personal growth, our deepening as an individual. So much so that in India, crisis was given the name of a system of yoga, Vishad Yoga. So we'll have a quick look at what crisis is as explained in the Gita. And if we have time, something on what Krishna teaches Arjuna to navigate that particular period in our life, that dark period in our life that we will inevitably at some point have to traverse.
We definitely have time, Prabhu. Don't hold yourself back.
So in the Gita begins with Arjuna's crisis. And a dark night, I'm going to use the term a dark night of the soul to describe that. In Sanskrit, the term is Vishad, which means literally despair. So Vishad is not a dark night of the soul is not a bad day at work. It's not, some difficulty or obstacle that comes our way and we manage to overcome it. A dark night of the soul is a period of such difficulty that it breaks up, it collapses our world of meaning, our sense of meaning and purpose. So much so that we feel unmoored, we're cast in darkness. We no longer know what to do. we've lost the sense of meaning and purpose in our life. So a dark night of the soul that, the dark night of the soul that any of us may go through will be unique for each of us. Mine will not be the same as yours. Yours will not be the same as a dark night of the soul of your friends. A dark night is as unique as our own fingerprint. However, this experience, it has 4 commonalities. There are 4 things that are similar across all dark nights of the soul. And Arjuna, you see them in the Gita, Arjuna describes them. So if we know what these symptoms of a dark night of the soul are, then if we're in a dark night of the soul, we'll be able to recognize what it is. Or if we've been through a difficult situation in the past, we can identify it for what it actually was. We can also be prepared if a dark night of the soul comes our way at some point in the future. So the first symptom of a dark night of the soul is suffering associated with time. So there are 3 types of suffering related to time: fear, lamentation, and confusion. Fear is suffering associated with the future. Lamentation or regret.
Simon, can you repeat that one more time? Your audio was choppy. Can you start from fear again, please? Fear is?
Fear is suffering associated with the future. Lamentation or regret is suffering associated with the past. And confusion is suffering associated with the present.
Cool.
So we experience these 3 types of suffering at various points. The dark night of the soul, they reach such a severity, they become so pronounced that they feel unbearable. So Arjuna describes his suffering to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 1. He explains how, he laments the past. In the future, he only sees signs of terrible reversals. And in the present, he expresses his confusion. In one particular verse, Karpanya dosho pahatas svabhava prichami tvang dharma samudachetaha yachreyasyan nishchitang bruhitan me shishyastehan shadidamang tvang prapannam. He says, Krishna, I'm completely confused. I thought I knew what to do and what not to do, but actually I am filled with bewilderment. Please become my teacher, my yoga teacher. Help me through this difficult period. And Krishna at that point begins to explain the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. So the first symptom of a dark night is suffering associated with time. The second symptom of a dark night is an impulse to retreat from life. So Arjuna, he wants to leave the battlefield. He wants to leave the field of action. In a dark night of the soul, we don't want to see anyone. We might just stay in our room. One thing about Arjuna's crisis is when we have a crisis, if we have a crisis, we often keep it to the confines of our home or our bedroom. Arjuna here has a public crisis in front of all the warriors of the earth. It doesn't get more dramatic than that. So in such a period of our life, we want to give up acting. We want to disconnect from life. That inclination, that drive to disengage from life can be so strong that it can even manifest as a will to take our own life. So in the Gita, Arjuna, he actually expresses that. He says, Krishna, maybe the best thing to do is if we just rush at the enemy. I won't have any weapons. I'll drop my weapons. we just rush towards the enemy and let them take me down. The third, let's go to the third symptom. There's a lot to say on each of these, but I'm going to try and move quickly. The third symptom of the dark night of the soul is the revealing of parts of us that we never knew existed. We might call it our dark side. Aspects of us that maybe only our closest family know about. Or maybe even we ourselves might not be aware of it. In a dark night, we might suddenly realize things that shock us. Like we might discover that we don't really care about other people. You know, it's horrific to be faced with an acknowledgement of, you know, to be faced with something like that. We might realize that we're actually I might realize I'm a very selfish person. I might realize I don't actually truly care about others. Or someone might realize just how much anger they hold in their hearts. Things that we don't want to see become visible. So I don't know if you know how they refine gold. You take the ore, gold ore, and in very hot temperature, there's impurities in the gold that rise to the surface. And when these impurities are removed, what you have left is pure solid gold. Well, it's liquid at that stage. So also if you make ghee, so ghee is used in Ayurveda, clarified butter. You heat butter and gradually this white froth comes to the top, which was invisible previously. When you skim it, at the end you have a golden liquid, which is ghee, and it has medicinal properties. So a dark night of the soul is a little bit like that, in that aspects of us that are hidden, even maybe from ourselves, become manifest to us for the first time. So for Arjuna, you want to know what becomes clear to Arjuna. At the end of the Mahabharata, very end, we discover each of the 5 brothers, there are 5 brothers, each of them, they're heading up to the mountains, the Himalayan mountains, and one by one they fall to the ground. And the eldest is Yudhishthira. He is the eldest of the 5 brothers. And he explains why each of these Pandavas, his brothers, what shortcoming they had. And Arjuna's shortcoming is that he was the best archer, and he knew it. And he had a sense of pride that no other warrior could defeat me. And he would make warriors' boasts that he wasn't always able to keep. So Arjuna was such a warrior that he had warrior names like Scorcher of the Enemy, Holder of the Bow, Hero of the Kurus. These are some of his names translated into English. So in the Gita, at Kurukshetra, in front of all the warriors of the earth, the hero of the Kurus wants to flee from the field of the Kurus. The scorcher of the enemy is being scorched by the enemy of his own crisis, his own despair. At that moment, Arjuna would have been so aware of his warrior's boasts and his sense of his own heroism and ability as a warrior. He would have been face to face with his own proverbial demons, you might say. So in our case, things that we didn't know about will manifest, and it's very difficult to actually look at that, to face that in a dark night. And then the last symptom of a dark night of the soul is complete helplessness. Complete helplessness. In a dark night, others will not be able to understand what we're going through. Why? Because if we have an accident, like a physical accident, we break an arm or something along those lines, will have something, a physical symptom of the accident or the situation we have been through. So in a dark night of the soul, we will mostly not have any physical outward symptom of that. No visible, nothing visible like a cast or something. So others around us won't be able to understand. They may say to us things like, easy spirituality, like slogans like, just let it go, choose happiness, get on with life. But none of that will be able to help us, because it's not that we don't have a will to move on. We have the will, but we lack the power. In this state of Vishad, there's complete helplessness. Everything we know even cannot help us. Everything we know intellectually cannot help us. Arjuna was a great warrior who had the best teachers. He learned from his brother Yudhishthir, the Dharma king. He learned from Vyasa, the author of the Mahabharata. He was taught by the greatest rishis or sages, but everything he knew could not help him in that moment of crisis. So this brings up an important point about the wisdom teachings of India and the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is not designed to give us information. It's so important that I'll repeat it again. The Bhagavad Gita is not designed to give us information. It's designed to give us, it's designed to change the way that we act in the world.
Simon, can you say that full statement one more time? Because the internet went choppy for about 10 seconds, even though you repeated it both times, so we couldn't hear you. And we were all hanging at the edges of our seat, wanting to catch every word. So if you say it one more time the whole way through, thanks.
I just want to apologize for the connection. I'm so sorry. So the Bhagavad Gita and in general, the teachings of India are not designed to give us information. They are designed to give us transformation. In other words, they are designed to change the way that we live in the world. So our intellectual understanding, what we might know, that in a dark night of the soul, none of that can help us. And that's an important teaching. So these are the four symptoms quickly. These are the four symptoms of a dark night of the soul. Now, what is it that produces a dark night? What is it that actually creates a dark night of the soul? Well, we are all storytellers. We all are authors of a story, and that story is the story of our life. In that story that we create, we're the lead character, right? And much of that story is actually inherited. We inherit it from our family, from society, from our friends, and it's a very limiting story. We carry that story with us wherever we go, and we live our life from that story. Now, that we have a story is not the problem. The main problem is that we believe our story so much that we think that, we're prepared to fight for it. We're prepared to lose our friends for it. We identify so closely with that story, we forget that it's simply a story. So the Bhagavad Gita
Simon, we lost you. We heard the part about where we start believing our story, and then you were saying the Bhagavad Gita, but then we lost you. Are you still with us? Oh gosh, I really hope his electricity did not die and didn't have a power outage. That will be sad.